DeSantis is your daddy now. In case you missed it, Mr. I Hate the Government decided to ban social media for children under the age of 14. DeSantis said about House Bill 3, quote, ultimately, we're trying to help parents navigate this very difficult terrain that we have now with raising kids, and so I appreciate the work that's been put in. House Bill 3 forces social media companies to delete the existing accounts of those who are under 14 years of age. Failure to do so is very expensive. The companies could be sued on behalf of the child who creates an account on their platform. The child could be awarded up to $10,000 in damages. Companies would also be liable for up to $50,000 per violation, including attorney's fees and court costs. Those aged 14 to 16 can have an account with parental consent. I guess politicians have decided that parents regain their parental choice once kids are teenagers. This makes no sense whatsoever, but then again, these are the same politicians that went right along with DeSantis' COVID lockdowns and his COVID checkpoints on the highway. So when it comes right down to it, these guys just pull stuff right out of their Interesting how this bill places all the blame on the social media companies and not the parents. Why aren't the parents fined by the government? It's so abusive and dangerous to have an account as a child, but aren't parents responsible for their own children? It's just a cash cow, basically, for parents. They share no accountability. They can maybe get 10 grand for their kid if they make an account. Who wouldn't want to go after that? But maybe if it's so lurid, parents should be held to the same standard and be assessed a fine for failing to protect their kids. If it's dangerous, as they say it is, and worthy of banning, then shouldn't the parents be liable for letting their kids have access to it? Besides, kids can't buy phones and the internet. It's the parents that give them the access in the first place. A fun little aside here is the complete contradiction of Republicans, the ones that say people kill people, not guns. Well, bad people hurt kids, not social media. The same argument a conservative would use to say we shouldn't hold gun companies liable is the same logic social media companies should be using. We aren't liable for what someone else does. If gun companies should be shielded from liability for those who buy their guns, then social media companies should be too. We already have laws about abusing kids. Enforce those. Increase the budget to hunt pedophiles and predators. But then again, this bill isn't about safety. It's about silencing dissent. Politicians are just pissy that they're mocked online and that the truth that the mainstream media blocks finds a way out into the world via social media. You see, conservatives love control and censorship too, just their particular flavor of it. And this is quite an anti-business bill for a Republican governor, don't you think? But then again, government overreach is fine if it's done in the name of your own party, am I right? Now, you may be saying, wait, what about the First Amendment? This must be unconstitutional. Don't worry about that. As Ron said, quote, anytime I see a bill, if I don't think it's constitutional, I veto it. He went on to describe it as a fair application of the law and Constitution. But here's the thing. Ron DeSantis isn't the arbiter of constitutionality. It isn't whatever Ron thinks goes. And I'd love to know how in the first place he derived that limiting free speech was not against the First Amendment. Remember, this is a guy who thinks he's anti-big government and complains about companies being too woke, going as far as to target these companies, threatening them taking action, saying that tried old phrase that Florida is where woke goes to die. Isn't the government deciding what's best for children the most woke thing you can do? He sure didn't like it with Disney when he thought their content was horrible and accused them of ramming it through kids' brains, bitching and moaning about it constantly. This is the same governor who whined about parental choice, extolling that parents get to decide education, books, and whether kids should be masked. Let's go back to the year 2021 when he said, quote, the federal government has no right to tell parents that in order for their kids to attend school in person, they must be forced to wear a mask all day, every day. The following year, in 2022, he said, quote, parents' rights have been increasingly under assault around the nation, but in Florida, we stand up for the rights of parents and the fundamental role they play in the education of their children. Well, what happened to all that parental choice, Ronnie? Are you only concerned about homoerotic books? Are you a little homophobe? If parents have the ultimate authority and know better than the government on how to raise their kids, then why the intervention into social media? DeSantis may say this as to protect kids, but in reality, it's a big middle finger to Florida parents. He thinks you're an idiot. He thinks you're a bad parent. He thinks you can't raise your own children. He thinks you're abusing your kids by letting them use social media to the extent that he needs to control you as a parent. Maybe if he wasn't so obsessed with his Don't Say Gay bill, he would realize some of this. Because for all the bad that social media may be doing, it's still up to the parents. You definitely don't need to be penalized for using an app. What is this, North Korea? Florida House Speaker Paul Renner and supporters of the new law say that social media use can harm children's mental health and can lead to sexual predators communicating with minors. Sure, that can happen, but not just on a social media app. Just the internet alone can do all of that. Renner said, quote, "None of us can afford to be on the sidelines when it comes to social media." Hear that little drum beat they're all walking to? That they're doing this for your safety? Well, don't forget that quote where you give up a little bit of your liberty to get a little bit of security. Yeah, that's what this is. This piece of legislation will take effect in January 2025. Because although your elected officials think it's incredibly dangerous and needs to be banned, it's okay if kids have access to it for another 9 months or so. And yeah, the internet in general isn't great. But you can contact predators online and decrease your mental health on other things besides social media apps. And besides, why can't parents decide what's right and wrong? Let parents control what their kids see, not the government. Let parents decide when and where to use social media, not the government. And if the government cared about a child's safety, would we even send them to public school in the first place? But that's a whole other topic for a whole other podcast. But you know, Florida, if your concern really is about the kids, why aren't you addressing the fact that 1 in 7 children in Florida face hunger, that nearly 1 in 5 children in your state live in poverty? Here's a whopper. Florida has the 3rd highest percentage of adults lacking basic prose literacy skills. That means 20% of Floridians are illiterate. Put another way, 1 in 5 can't read. Maybe you should try making sure kids can make it into adulthood with the ability to read before you go after social media. I'm definitely getting big stones in a glass house type of vibes from your state. This isn't just an insult to parents, though. It's a way to sock it to social media companies because they hurt conservatives' feelings. Yeah, they shadow ban and censor, but that's their business. That's their right. All y'all say is facts don't care about your feelings, right? Just look at Twitter. Your guy bought it, flipped it, still censors people, shadow bans, artificially props up certain accounts and audience. But it's okay when your side does it, right? Because we all know it's really the TikTok that's stemming all of these bans in different states and at the federal level. So my message, get bent. Social media has a lot of trash on it, but coming from scandalous, sleazy, salacious, pervy, rapey, demonic politicians, it's quite ironic. Most of these politicians are probably actively cheating on their wives and neglecting their kids. I bet most would kill their mother for a $1 campaign donation. But what should really freak you out is that this has such a bipartisan agreement. House Bill 3 in Florida passed with 109 yays and just 4 nays. In the Senate, it passed with 30 yays and just 5 nays. When do these peckerheads in government ever agree? That should send a shiver right up your spine. When do these turd nuggets ever pretend to work together? I guess Ron was emasculated after performing so horribly in the primary and needed to reassert himself as the big guy. Well, congrats, Ron. You may never be commander-in-chief, but you still get to be authoritarian-in-chief in the Sunshine State. You may say Florida is where woke goes to die, but really, Florida is where liberty goes to die. So Ron DeSantis, go ahead, put on your high-heel cowboy boots, give that constipated smile, and keep living your best life as Florida's lead dictator. Emphasis on the dick. Thanks for listening to Broad Thinking. Be sure to tune in next week for an all-new episode. Don't forget to tune back in on Sunday night to listen to my interview with Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein.